A little later than usual, but here we are. And welcome to everybody who's out there. Hello from Gail. Hello, Mary Lou. And Karen and Dan. Penguin game or PICT? Obviously PICT. I mean, come on, penguins aren't even doing well. Whereas PICT is. Hello, James, and hello, John Henry. I have my coffee. We have the piano music of Ravel. It's a bright, sunny day. What more could we wish for? I think everybody will agree it is time Ellen got a haircut. Hello, John Matthew from sunny Toronto. The wilds of Decker's Point, Buckley ladies, living on the edge. Very hot in the Netherlands. It's very hot here too. Everybody in Ireland's rejoicing apparently that it's 23 degrees, which is a hot summer. And everywhere else it's like 35 plus. Now, at the end of today's webinar, I'm going to be telling everybody, or telling you all, the delights that we have coming up over the next couple of months. And we've got some interesting stuff that's going to be happening over the next couple of months, talking about, amongst other things, a classic playwright from Pittsburgh, and more about the greatest classic theatre writer of them all, and more interesting information about the development of theatre in Ireland at the beginning of the 20th century. So there'll be some interesting stuff coming up. I'll tell you all about it at the end of today's webinar. Hello, Grace, a hot day in Dublin. It's all relative, Grace. I guarantee it's hotter here. But I'm delighted that the sun is shining in Dublin, finally, because you had a rotten July, I believe. Hello, Bill and Joan. The music, by the way, is usually it's pertinent to something I'm going to talk about. It's just, I like the piano music of Ravel, that's all. So I hope you enjoy it too. The other thing I'm interested in for everybody out there who is listening, if there are any topics about classic theatre or Irish theatre that you'd like us to address, leave us a message. Don't put it in the chat, put it in the questions thing at the bottom of the screen. Or send us an email. You can email us, or you can get onto us at our website. But if there's any topic, and I do mean classic theatre and Irish theatre. Let's not go outside the confines of the corral in which we live. But if there are any topics you want us to talk about or have a discussion on, we'd be quite delighted to help facilitate you. We are going to be here forever, so no topic outside, within that area, no topic is out of the question. We will do our very best to make sure that we can cover it for you. So we're all beginning to get loaded up here. Hello, Jan. Hello, Julian Al. Hello, Marge in Brookline. You see, one of the joys of being online is that we can all be together without having to cross a river. And in Pittsburgh, those of you who don't live in Pittsburgh, crossing rivers is almost anathema to existing. But one of the joys of online is we cross rivers, we cross mountains, we cross oceans to be with one another. And it's such a delight. I do look forward to my Fridays, to knowing that there are people basically all over the planet tuning in and saying hi. And don't forget, spread the word. Tell your friends. The more the merrier. How are we doing? Hello, Dennis in Greensburg. One of our regulars. As is indeed Grace in Dublin. As indeed many of the people who actually say hello are regulars. We get an awful lot of people who aren't regulars who don't say hello, but it's nice for people to say hello. And doing nicely. Well, it's just gone 2 o'clock. I'm going to have another sip of coffee. And I'm going to let Ravel disappear into the nether regions. So welcome, everyone. Now, this week it's an interesting title this week, but we felt we've got a whole new series of things coming up as we go through the summer and heading towards the fall. So I wanted to do, really what I'm doing is I'm answering a couple of questions that are often asked of me about PICT, about our company. And so I thought the best way to do that was to actually have a webinar on it and say, well, what exactly are we and what exactly do we mean when we say we are a theatre company that deals in classics and Irish theatre? And obviously, dealing in Irish theatre is very self-explanatory. If it's Irish, we deal with it. Not as much as I would like, but we are limited to the amount of work that we can do in any given year, both in terms of logistics and finances. But what is classic? Now, when this company was founded, it was 24 years ago. It was founded as Pittsburgh Irish and Classical Theatre. It wasn't an original name because a very dear friend of mine, old friend of mine from Dublin, called Vincent O'Neill, had moved to Buffalo, upstate New York, and he had established a company there called the Irish and Classical Theatre. And so when my esteemed predecessors decided to set up a company in Pittsburgh, they wanted to deal with the same material. And one of them was from Buffalo and said, well, why not call it the Pittsburgh Irish and Classical Theatre? And a legend was born. So that's where the title came from. But the intention of the company always was to present classical and Irish plays. And that is what, to a large extent, was done for the last 24 years. A fair amount of Irish theatre, and what was then constantly described as classical. I decided that, in terms that it was tended to be costume plays. So I decided when I was given the leadership of the company, which is now nearly 8 years ago, I wanted to re-examine what we were and what we did. And I had been, remember, working with the company prior to taking on the leadership of it, both as a director and as an actor. And I always felt that the word classical was wrong, because the word classical is a very specific period of both musical and writing history. The classical period in music, for instance, sort of came after the Baroque and before the Romantic. You could almost say the same in terms of writing, in that classical tends to denote plays that are, where men wear tights and women wear big dresses. So I wanted to go beyond that. And after much discussion with the team that we evolved, we decided to just remove 2 letters from the word classical and become PICT Classic and Irish Theatre, or Pittsburgh Irish and Classic Theatre. Classic being a very specific definition. And again, this is in answer to one of the many questions I get asked about the company and about what we do and why we do things. What do I mean by classic? what is a classic play? If it's not a play where men wear tights and women wear big dresses, then what the hell is it? And my definition is quite specific. A classic play is a play, or a classic novel for that matter, but a classic play is a play that is true of its time and for all time. Now, you can have plays that are written about today's problems. You can have plays that are written in direct response to things that happen in the news, things that you hear about, things that people talk about. But they don't always last because life moves on, life evolves, everything changes. But there are certain themes, certain subjects, certain of the great themes of human nature that become almost eternal. They may change in their texture, but they stay true in their essence. And that's what, to my mind, makes a play a classic play. When it's not about just what one might call a daily occurrence, but it is about the underlying theme, the underlying human element that remains the same, that remains constant, then that makes it classic. It elevates it to the point of being classic. I don't mean elevate in the sense of making it better. There are many classic plays that are not very good, and there are many what I would describe as not classic plays that are actually a lot better, but are dealing with this particular theme, because every company has to have its theme, and that's ours. Our dealing with this theme is that if a play is true of its time and for all time, that makes it a classic. And that's what we will deal with. So how did that change what we were and what we became? Well, we also took on board another thing, and this is to a large extent my sort of calling card, if you like. And again, it's another word I'm constantly being asked about. What do I mean by it? I decided that we would return to the old concept of regional theatre throughout America and throughout the UK, and theatre as it evolved in Ireland over many years. And that was the notion of company theatre, that we would work together as a group of artists, particularly the actors, working together on a very regular basis so that they learn and understand the shorthand of acting between them, so that they actually become a team, a true team. And that by working together and they grow together, they they hone their craft together. And that when you put them together onto a stage, you are looking, it's a bit like you can gather together, if you gather together 4 musicians, 2 violinists, a violist and a cellist, who've never met before, and you stick them on chairs and you give them a Beethoven string quartet and say, play that, lads, they'll play it, and they'll probably play it quite well, but they won't play it brilliantly. They won't play it together as a unit. And the same is true of actors. You can take any group of talented and experienced actors, give them a script, give them 3 or 4 weeks rehearsal, they'll do a very good job of it. But if those actors know each other and the nuances of each other, if they understand each other on a much closer and familiar level, the quality of the work they will do will be so much better. And my own personal experience of this was the way that I operated for many years in the experience of the Gate Theatre in Dublin. And if you want to see the example, go and look for Beckett on screen, go and look at the production of Waiting for Godot that we did. You see 4 actors there who spent 30 to 40 years of their life working together, and you see the difference. So that's the second point that we made a change about, and what is PICT. And the third word was a word that I constantly use, and that is minimalist. Now, minimalism is more usually associated with the visual arts, but minimalism is an absolute artistic concept. And to me, it is a concept wrapped around a very simple point. Theatre is the art of the actor. I'll give you an example of what I mean by this, because I center the actor at the heart of everything I do. You can do a play, you put on a play without a director or without scenery. or without lights, or without costumes and props. You can even put on a play without a theatre. But you can't do a play without actors. Actors are theatre. That's what makes theatre theatre, is the art of the actor. Mind you, I could contradict myself straight away saying Samuel Beckett did actually do it with his play Breath, although there was the sound of a baby crying, so that constitutes an actor as well. But without an actor, there is no drama. Actors can create, through improvisation, performance. They can work out for themselves how the thing should balance. They don't need props or scenery or lights or anything. All they need is this simple function that they act. So my move towards minimalism for the company is based on what I consider the credo for myself as an actor or as a director or as a theatre maker, whatever you like. And it is the famous Peter Brook quote from his own book. And I will read you the full quote because it's often misquoted. I can take any empty space and call it a bare stage. A man walks across this empty space while somebody else is watching him. And this is all that is needed for an act of theatre to be engaged. You could read woman there as well. This was written in the 1960s. But that's it. That's the fundamental, that all it takes for an act of theatre is for somebody to be watched by somebody else. In that sense, in a classroom, the teacher is in an act of theatre when the students watch and listen. And good teachers are performing, because to perform and to entertain is the best way to educate. So this notion of theatre in its very purest, simplest sense is around us all the time. You go to a fairground and you see in the old fairground barker, is an actor acting to an audience. Any situation where somebody is in an empty space and somebody else is watching is an act of theatre. And that is minimalism at its most pure. And that is why, and I think I've talked before about my experience in Morocco, watching storytellers in the middle of a patch of the great square and a whole circle of people standing around just watching them. That's all you needed for an act of theatre to take place. So when we look at classics, I want to go through a list of, I'm going to go through a few plays, I've got some pictures for you, of work that we've done. And I want to explain the logic of them, both in terms of their nature as classic and how minimalism can affect the way we approach them and the way we observe them. Now, there was, before I took over the job here, but when I was still working with the company as both a director and as an actor, I was engaged in one production, and it was the addressing of a particular classic by a particular Irish playwright. The playwright was Oscar Wilde. The play was both classic and Irish, so it absolutely fulfilled our mission. Now, it was presented in a borrowed production. The production concept had come from the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, and so the director was the director in Dublin. The design was the set exactly as it had been presented in Dublin, and they even brought over, although he was mostly here anyway, the leading lady, and that was, of course, the importance of being earnest. Now, the set, the design concept, instead of naturalism, was based on a very elaborate simplicity. That's a wonderful combination of words there. An elaborate simplicity. A concept for the play which was that it would be performed by Oscar Wilde and other people in a Parisian cafe in the latter part of the 19th century. In fact, the director composed an entire scene prior to the play beginning of Oscar coming into the cafe and being abused and robbed by this young Parisian gamin, and sitting down rather depressed and drinking absinthe and smoking a cigarette and listening to a recording of music on the piano and hearing a voice out of the air saying, Did you hear what I was playing, Lane? And suddenly, in his mind, the whole play takes place. So in other words, we took the play out of its conventional pseudo-naturalistic setting and placed it into a world where we could make it up as we went along. Not the words, obviously, but what you were looking at were it appeared that the actors were creating it as they went along. And so even, for instance, some of the costumes, the most famous one being when Oscar suddenly turns into Lady Bracknell and needs clothing, he rips off a tablecloth, the one that you can see, I think, to the left-hand corner of your screen, and behind it another cloth, and on top of that, a stuffed peacock. And the result is in another photograph we have coming up. There you have it. Dear Lady Bracknell in all her charm, grace, beauty, and splendor, with a small cup of tea. And I have no idea how difficult it was to balance that bloody hat on my head. But anyway, this is the notion of taking what is a conventionally realistic or pseudo-realistic play that is normally presented in 3 acts with 3 different sets and lots of, and taking it and presenting it in its purest form in a single setting with a single concept, to say what we are demonstrating in this is this timeless play, which is about class and the abuse of class and the abuse of individuals, and it's dealt with not as a heavyweight drama, but it is dealt with in the classic ability of the Irish writer to satirize anything, and particularly Oscar Wilde. What we did do was make demands on the audience's imagination. Because what you want to do is provide the audience with enough information for them to decide what this is, where this is. Because when they are working at that, they cease to be observers and become participants. And it's also following another dictum of Oscar Wilde, which he actually wrote in the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. And it is a wonderful phrase, and it's something that every director and actor should always remember. It is in the brain and the brain alone that the rose is red. That simple fact should tell you exactly why we do what we do, why we utilize the techniques that we do. We are stimulating this in the audience, because it is only in here that the play exists. We stand on a stage, we say words, we put on lights and pretty costumes. But if it isn't happening in here, it does not exist. It is in the brain and the brain alone that the rose is red. Now, let's move on from one of the most elaborate of Irish plays to what is probably the most minimalist of plays, certainly in the 20th century, and one whose setting, in other words, the setup for the play, demanded simply a country road, a rock, and a tree. Oh yes, and a moon. Waiting for Godot, I believe to be the greatest of the modern classics. I actually will go so far as to say I think it is the second greatest play ever written. The first greatest play we're going to be doing 3 programs on later in the year. That's by Shakespeare, and it's called King Lear. But anyway, Waiting for Godot is drama stripped down to its absolutely essential minimum. The requirement from the writer is a barren place. Go back to Peter Brook. I can take an empty space, somebody there and somebody watching, and that's all I need for drama. The setting for Waiting for Godot, an empty road, nothing. A rock, a tree, and a very barren, bare tree at that. Because he wants barrenness and emptiness because it is an examination of the human condition. So he wants to strip away everything other than the human condition, which is 2 men doing the one thing that we spend our entire lives doing, waiting. When we're born, we wait to be fed. Then we wait to go to school. Then we wait to get a job. Then we wait to get married. Then we wait for the children to be born. Then we wait for retirement, and we wait for vacations. And after retirement, we wait till we die. So basically, from the moment of birth, we are waiting for the moment of death. And the play examines quite simply, what do we do in the meantime while waiting? We play games. We have joyous times. We have sad times. We have bleak moments. We have despair. But fundamentally, we spend our life waiting. To demonstrate that, rather than elaborating on all the possibilities that life can offer, Beckett strips away, and we did with this production, strip away everything that was utterly unnecessary to leave us simply with a space to act, a rock to sit on, and a tree. And of course, a moon to appear for night. So minimalism in its own sense, and you know, you can't do an elaborate, well, you could. I've actually seen it done, and it's awful. Minimalism is the utter demand of this play. This play is a perfect and absolute example of minimalism. Now, there are others. Another play that we did very early on, in fact, it was the first play that was done after I had taken over the leadership of the company. And it's, I think, an extremely beautiful play. And I think it is a classic and always will be, because it is a true play for all time. An examination of the tragedy of the Holocaust, told as if in a series of school lessons, and it's called Our Class. Now, Our Class deals with a topic that is almost impossible to do well in the theatre, because you are dealing with the tragedy of the Holocaust. Always difficult to stage, and there are many plays have been written. There was an Irish writer called Desmond Forrestal, who was a priest, in fact, who wrote a play about Kolbe, the Catholic priest who died in Auschwitz, who voluntarily went into a cell to be starved to death to replace another man. And if you go to Auschwitz, you will go to the cell, you see a huge candle there that Pope John Paul II left there when he visited it. But that play, like many others on the topic, it becomes trite, overly sentimental, maudlin, unconvincing. What this play does is examines one of the horrors, not within a concentration camp, but within a Polish village, a thing that actually happened amongst the villagers who grew up together, whose families had grown together. They were part of a community that was together, but some of them were Catholic and some of them were Jewish. And when the pressure came, and when the threat came from the Nazis, the Jews were put into a building, and the building was set alight, and they were burnt to death. Now, this is an appalling story. I remember when we did it, the effect it had on people was so considerable. There were people in denial. There were people that became regret, but it made people think. And it did it because the play itself demands an absolute simplicity of staging. You cannot complicate the staging. You can see from this photograph, we had a schoolroom, we had chairs, and we had an empty floor. That was it. And all of those young people that you see in it, and it was a very young cast, all of them played characters from school age to old age, except the ones that died on the way. And we kept them on stage after they died. The play was directed by Aoife Spillane Hinks. Wonderful. She's actually American, but lives in Ireland. So that nobody ever left the stage. The dead were always with us, watching. And in this way, we took a topic that could have become maudlin, could have become over-sentimentalized, but the play itself demanded such a simplicity, such a minimalism of staging, that the audience were almost drawn into being part of it, which is where theatre, I believe, differs from any other performing art, with the possible exception of dance. But even with dance, there is a separation. But when theatre works when drama works well, the audience is in the play. And that's what this kind of theatre does. It doesn't make you sit back and look at stuff. It makes you sit forward and partake in the debate. And the debate of this play was quite awful. I mean awful in the pure sense of the word, worthy of awe. The idea that a community could self-destruct out of fear and distrust and doubt. And it was quite brilliant on that basis. Only a simplicity of staging can accommodate such a presentation. I think I'm putting forward the argument all the time. Minimalist theatre is best. Now, not everybody will agree with me, and even I have done some rather elaborate things in my time. But the less you put on the stage, the more you depend upon the actors. The more you depend upon the actors, the more you send to them, and the more the audience identify with them, and the better the theatre becomes, I believe. So I want to go back to another production that I was involved with, both in Dublin and here in Pittsburgh, prior to my taking over the leadership of the company. And we're back with Oscar Wilde. And this was, I think, a perfect example of what minimalism actually represents. A script written by Oscar Wilde of such beauty in terms of the language. And the language is so rich. It is purple prose taken to the nth degree. It is so full. The words drip with color. The words drip with sensuality, with eroticism, with luxury. Luxury is the best word. The play is Salome, and which has come up. There we go. Now, Salome by Oscar Wilde is the story, as we know, of King Herod wanting her to dance, and she agrees to dance, and asks for the head of John the Baptist, Yochanan, in the play, and he is forced to give it. So the story is remarkably simple. Now, I first came to this play in Dublin under the direction originally of Stephen Burkoff, who is one of the enfants, well, he's not an enfant anymore, he's older than me, but of the British theatre, who was also one of the best, I think, pupils of Lecoq in Paris, who had a whole specificity of the physical theatre that Burkoff became a brilliant exponent of. So when we first presented it in Dublin, we were amazed at the degree, I learned a huge amount, the degree of minimalism that this imagination could go for. Because when you have a play, so I remember saying to him before we even began rehearsals, I said, how are you going to deal with that? I mean, the play is so filled with color and shape and luxury. I used the word then, luxury. How do you deal with that? And he said, we do it in black and white. And that's exactly what we did. We all wore black and white. It was black. It was black tuxedos. All the dresses were blacks and whites and what have you. I felt when we did it here, I wanted to be different. So I eventually took over the production in Dublin, and I was playing Herod and restaging it. And with Burkoff's blessing, we did a lot more re-choreographing of it. But what was interesting, what was intriguing about it was that we played it remarkably slowly. I don't want to say in slow motion because that's wrong. We played it slowly. We allowed every single line of the text to be expressed with absolute precision. So a play that took 47 minutes to read, if you read it straight through, took us a little over 2 hours to perform because all the movement was slowed down. Not slow motion, just slowed down. And what this did was it allowed the actor to become central. It allowed the word to become central. One was no longer simply addressing, building, doing acting in front of pretty scenery. There was virtually no scenery. The only addition to the word and the motion was that we had constant music in the background. We had a pianist, brilliant Irish composer called Roger Doyle, who came over when we did it here as well. Who had created a completely underlined piano score that went right the way through the play. But again, because of its purity, because of its absolute simplicity, only the actor and the word dominated the play. It was simply acting and word. There you see Salome doing the famous dance of the seven veils. She never took off a stitch of clothing, because the dance, as we clearly established, and in fact, as Oscar Wilde said in one of his letters, I think to Andre Gide, it is in Oscar's mind that in Herod's mind that the dance is taking place. It is in the brain and the brain alone that the rose is red. It is in the mind of Herod, and only in the mind of Herod, that Salome is naked. So that's the images that we took. We kept that absolute purity of image. There you see her dancing, the chorus watching, Roger playing the piano in the background. This is from the Pittsburgh production of it. That was Jim Mason from Canada who was playing Herod, and Nicole Underhay playing Salome. And you may see a couple of other PICT faces there in the background as well. But this is a perfect example. This is an absolute example. Look at the staging. There is nothing other, basically, than a long box to sit on and a floor to stand on. A chair for the king because he is the king. The chorus never leaving, always there, commenting, supporting, becoming the scenery, becoming the setup of the play. But the play centered always, completely and utterly on the actor and the word. And that is minimalism in practice. And allows, in a strange way, because the play is redolent with the luxury of words, you are having a luxury of acting. And again, I'm using that word in its very purest sense. It's minimalism at a brilliant level. Now, we did a play which was based, in fact, about a true story of a group of amateur artists in the north of England. But the play itself was, I believe, classic because it's about the story of art. It's about the universality of art. And that art, which is often considered, visual arts, painting, is often considered an elitist form, is in fact available and essential to the whole of humanity. Art represents humanity. The visual arts is a representation of humanity, and that painters, the capacity and ability and willingness to paint is something that lies deep down within us all. Most of us never learned the skills of it, but all of us have that desire to do it, to doodle, to express ourselves. We do it. We do it in the simplest ways. As I say, you'll be sitting on a phone and you've got a pencil and a paper and you suddenly find you've drawn something. The creation of visual art is inherent within all of us. And the Pitman painters was a perfect example of that need and desire both to express through visual arts and to understand it. It tells us that art is about us. All art is about us. On the wall in the back of that shot, you can see some of the actual paintings that the actual Pitman painters did. Then you see the group of actors playing them. But the art is the expression of these miners who worked in the day digging coal out of the ground, and in the evening gathering together with paint and brushes and canvas and creating representation of their world as they saw it. Now, if you've been listening, you may have heard me talk before about, the fundamentals of art that, 60,000 years ago, a group of guys went out and killed a few deer and brought them home, and the women cooked them and they ate them and they danced and they told the story of the hunt. And the only reason we know it happened was because they painted it on the wall of a cave. And that is exactly what these guys are doing. And that is what we all do. And that is what all visual artists do. They paint what is here and transfer what is here through the medium of creation, be it a painting or a sculpture or whatever, into the brain of the audience. And the understanding of that happens in the brain of the audience. The painting exists as art only in the brain of the observer. Between the artist and the observer, it's just paint and canvas. But what it says is that transference of ideas using the paint and canvas as the medium for it. As I would say that the play, the script, is the medium through which the audience reach the actor and the actor reaches the audience. But the actor is the ultimate expression of what those words may mean. And the Pitman painters, the simplicity of the staging of that was absolutely essential. Any more complex than that, and it would have detracted from the dual essence of the play. The actors and the images of art. That was all the audience had to see, or should see, or needed to see. So that in that sense, the audience shared the experience of the art through the experience of the Pitman painters, with no barriers between them. No barriers between the audience, the performers, and the visualizations of that art. And that's the primary point about theatre. The audience should always be joint participants, not merely lookers-on. If you are just sitting looking at it, it's not working for you. You've got to be participating. And you participate by laughing, by crying, even by being disgruntled and annoyed and storming out of the theatre, objecting grossly to it. You are then participating. It has touched you. It is happening in here. That's the essence of theatre. And Pitman painters did that. It was extraordinary. At the end of the first half, there is this moment when the guys have gone to a museum, and for the first time they see the paintings of Van Gogh. And they are completely blown away because they are looking at the work of somebody who is, I mean, I'm going to use the P word here. It's not quite true, but whose painting is primitive in comparison to the old masters, and yet that reaches out and grabs them by the throat, which is what Van Gogh's paintings do to me. They, you know, if you ever go to Amsterdam, go to the Van Gogh Museum. So it's blow your mind away. But anyway, you can see Van Gogh. It does literally reach out of the canvas and pulls you in. Rembrandt does the same, but in a totally different context. But for these guys, the purity and the simplicity of Van Gogh blew them away in the way that theatre should do to all of us. I want to talk about another classic play, and it's classic because of its theme. It's actually known of as a comedy. There was a very good movie of it. It's starring Michael Caine and what's her name? I've forgotten because I'm terrible. No, it's not that one. It's that one. Educating Rita. There was a very good film. Somebody that you might know from PICT Classic Theatre had a tiny role in it when his beard was red. But this play, Educating Rita, is a classic as well and demands a minimalism, and I will explain why. Apart from being a delightful comedy, it is filled with so many aspects of the human condition. And above all others, the need, indeed, the lust for knowledge. Rita has a lust for knowledge. She wants to know. She is a girl from a completely working class background where education was considered a stupid waste of time, where people would rather go to the pub and drink themselves stupid and sing silly songs rather than sitting down at home with a good book and learning something. She was considered peculiar for that need, but she has this lust for knowledge, and her lust for knowledge represents all of us who never had the opportunity to discover that there is a world out there, that there is a world way beyond the level of our small experience, that there are places where people do things differently that would consider us abnormal. There are countries that have a different, complete set of rules that would consider ours very strange indeed. And over the number of years that the play covers, all of this happens to her. All of these discoveries happen to her fundamentally in this one place of learning. Because in educating Rita, that room that her tutor, Frank, occupies is the world of knowledge. The room, in a sense, defines the limitations and the expanse of learning. And so that's why we made it look the way we did. That's why we went for a completely minimalist look in that scenic design. You enter through a door into a place of knowledge. The bookshelves are there because they contain the knowledge. There are no other walls. That's it. Because there are no limitations to learning other than those we impose on ourselves. So when Rita walks through that door, surrounded by the one thing she wants, knowledge, confronted by the one place to gain it, Frank's desk, there are no other walls to cage her in, because there are no limitations. Knowledge has no limitations. Her teacher represents, in that sense, everybody from whom we can learn. And because the play is correct about the nature of humanity, he is not, we're not talking about a great sage like Socrates or Plato or, Aristotle. We're talking about a guy with a drink problem teaching in a second-rate university, with a bad marriage and bad breath, probably. The very human nature of the teacher is also part of that, the fabric of that lust for knowledge, that her lust for knowledge regenerates within him a desire to teach. This is all part of it. This is why this play is classic. This play is true for all time, because for all time there will be Ritas, there will be Franks, and there will be rooms like this where when you enter, the world, no matter how small it is, the world is contained within it, and you can learn from that. I think it's a remarkable play. That was Martin Giles and Karen Baum in our production. Now, another universal theme, and I think this is a particularly brilliant play. I think this is a classic, and I'm very proud of the fact that it was premiered by PICT. It is by a Pittsburgh writer, and I think it is actually a deeply important piece of writing. Lisa Brennan, who a Pittsburgh actress and writer, wrote. I actually had she asked me to do the staged first reading of it, which we did. And once we did that, I determined straight away, we're doing this play, and we did. A truly remarkable play, a true classic in every sense, and it's called For the Tree to Drop. And this is a play, ostensibly, it's set on a southern plantation during the Civil War. It's about the fact that a slave has been hung because he was constantly trying to escape. The plantation owner had him hung and left the instruction, leave the body there hanging from the tree until it rots, as a demonstration, as a warning. There are only 5 characters in the play. You can see 4 of them, I think, in that shot. The plantation owner, the ghost of the slave in the tree, the wife of the plantation owner, and the sister of the slave in the tree, who is digging a hole underneath the swinging body. The title was taken. This is why I think the play is quite remarkable, because it is about so much more than that. The play is rich, so rich in imagery. The title of the play, For the Tree to Drop, comes from the famous Billie Holiday song, Strange Fruit. because it was about bodies being left in trees and hanging and waiting for the tree to drop their strange fruit. And the strange fruit in this was the body of her brother. It is about slavery. It is about family. It is about human relationships. It's about sense of duty. And beneath all of that, wonderful layering of writing. It is also a completely brilliant reworking of Sophocles' play Antigone. Now, this is writing at its very finest, and this richness of writing gives such opportunity for the actor to act. 5 actors, each representing a different aspect of this story and a different aspect of humanity and a different approach to this woman digging the hole, and she will keep digging it till she dies. All human life is examined within those relationships. The plantation owner amused to the point where he won't stop her from digging. The plantation owner's wife, who has been browbeaten into almost a comatose situation, and all she wants to do is to help the woman dig. But you've got this incredible richness of character playing off one another in one of the great classic storylines that has been there for 2,500 years since Sophocles first addressed it, brought completely into our lives by expressing it in a piece of history we can understand, social injustice that we know about, human condition that we can recognize. And all of it, because of the quality of the writing, demanding nothing more than that the actors acted out. And as you saw in the photograph, there was very little set, somewhere for people to sit and somewhere for her to dig. That was all that was required. Everything else, the minimal requirement was that you had actors acting, and that's what we had. Use of light, yes, use of rhythm particularly, but all of that was about acting. So, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. Excuse me. So how do you deal with epic theatre? How do you deal with epic theatre? I've got 2 or 3 to discuss on that point. We did a production of Charles, it was an adaptation, which again, I had originally done in Dublin. Excuse me, I just dropped everything. Of Charles Dickens' story, Great Expectations. And you sort of say to yourself, well, how do you do a book that is so vast? How do you put that onto a stage? And the answer is with great simplicity. You reduce everything to the essentials, because no matter how big a book may be, it's always about 2 or 3 specific essential themes. And it's always about a handful of relationships and how they develop. So you don't need more than those relationships. What you're looking at is a photograph that actually was the end of one scene, the whole of another, and the beginning of the next, just played out by 3 actors and the way they look at each other. You're calling yet again on the imagination of the audience to fill in the gaps. In this story of Great Expectations, in this production, there were over 30 locations as the story was presented, 30 different locations. But in the brain, again, is the rose red. You create simple pictures just by actors. Now, there's a wonderful episode in the story where Magwitch and the boys they're trying to get Magwitch out of the country, so they put him in a boat to row him down river, and then he sees a thing and it all falls in and he drowns. So we put it on the stage. How do you do that? We didn't even make a full boat. We made the front of it and the back of it. You can see that in the picture. We surrounded them by smoke, and we had sound effects, and we let the actor act. And that is a classic example of minimalism theatre at its most immediate, because all he had to do was shout out at the front of the boat, and the boat rocks, and the thunder and lightning happens, and you are on the River Thames, and there is a storm, and it is the actors who are creating most of that effect. You could almost do it without sound effects. You can almost do it without light. You can do it just with actors acting. This is a perfect example of how you take epic stories and you bring them down to their simple essence and present only that, and trust in the fact that when the actors act, the audience's imagination will fill in the gaps. It's almost painting by numbers. In that play, two rooms represented two complete worlds in the life of Pip. A table represented an entire existence for Miss Havisham. That's all you need. The simpler, the better. When we did Macbeth, when Shakespeare wrote his plays, don't forget, he did it in a very minimalist setting, both at the Globe Theatre and later on when they went indoors at the Blackfriars. All the stagings, all the settings were remarkably simple. So we followed that same principle. Macbeth is, the greatest adventure story he wrote, full of change and full of locations and full of all sorts of things. So we made a very simple decision. We used as our basic concept for the visualization of it, we used an Irish theme. We used the Giant's Causeway. And any of you seeing pictures of the Giant's Causeway know that there are these great slabs of rock that form what look like castle battlements and chairs and seats and various other things. So by making that, the side of the stage had the representations of the Giant's Causeway, that motif gave us everything from a barren place to a castle to a throne room and a battlefield. We used light and sound more than we used scenery, but the primary presentation of everything was always centered on the actor. We made the actors create the mood. We made the actors create the location. Because by doing that, the audience is pulled in to focus on the actor constantly. The audience is partaking with the actor, not looking back, not sitting back and going, oh, that's pretty, but going in there and saying, oh my God, I'm scared. That's theatre in action. That's the way it should work. I'm moving on a bit quicker because I'm spending too much time on this. But letting the audience do the work is one of the great principles of theatre. Let the audience fill in the gaps, painting by numbers. We did the same again. Another epic was Dickens' epic we did was Oliver Twist. And this is a story that is incredibly linear. It starts, it's one of those classic cases, starts at the beginning, goes on to the end, and then stops. But as it travels through this linear path, the intention of the play and the pace of the play and the pressure of the play gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. It could run away with you unless you're very careful. When you look at the book, and remember the book is not like the musical. It's not jolly old Fagin singing, you got to pick a pocket or two. Fagin is a monster in the book. Fagin is quite evil. This is a book about child corruption at its most worst. They weren't just pickpockets. These were child prostitutes. These were cutthroats. These were evil. And they were created evil by Fagin and the likes of Fagin. And London, at the time Dickens was writing this, was rife with this. These are monsters. The character of Bill Sikes is not just a nasty old piece of work. He is a psychotic monster. Nancy is not the tart with the heart of gold. Nancy is a former child prostitute, and the only way she stays alive is because she's known to belong to Bill. This is an evil world. How do you create that? All of those locations, all of that atmosphere, you can see in that photograph, that's the set. A series of platforms and a cardboard cutout of St. Paul's Cathedral in the background. And everything that happened in that story happened there, on those platforms, just by the actors defining where we were, the actors defining what we were. There you see, for instance, that's the trial of Fagin. No courtroom, just a judge sitting in a chair and Fagin standing as if in a dock, and hovering in the background an executioner waiting to come on and hang him. As simple as that, because the simpler you make it, you draw the audience in. The actors, in this purest sense, become my memory from Morocco. They are the storytellers. They are the tellers of tales. If the actor is given the opportunity to be the storyteller, that we're not putting up scenery, I mean, we do scenery, but we put up the minimum amount. We only provide enough for the audience's imagination to work and the actors to have an adequate backdrop for their capacity to tell the story. I remember when we did that Oliver Twist here, and an audience member came up to me one night after the show and said, "Oh, we really enjoyed it, really enjoyed it." And I said, "Oh, that's great, that's wonderful." It looked exactly like it did in the book. And I thought, what book have you been reading? But what the hell? And people like it. That's wonderful. But it did look exactly like it did in the book, in his imagination. It is in the brain, and the brain alone, that the rose is red. Sometimes you go for a little bit more in terms of reality, but you're only doing it in a sense, and rather like I talked about the importance of being earnest at the beginning, you're doing it to keep it, to use a visual image that allows you to fill in all the other gaps. Now, when we did The Lion in Winter, which again is another classic piece, it is not a classic piece about Henry II. It's a classic piece about dysfunctional families. It just happens to be set around Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine because it's a fascinating time and they were a fascinating couple. Henry being the most powerful king that Europe actually probably ever saw after Charlemagne, and Eleanor being a woman of fabled beauty and infinitely more fabled wealth, and Henry having this young, almost child mistress and 3 sons, all of whom wanted to inherit the crown, and only one of them could. So you've got this wonderful, wonderful drama about dysfunctional family. So when we staged it, we wanted to put it in its time, but keep it not only in its time, but allow it to be, and the text itself allows it to be incredibly modern. So we came up with a scenic concept that was basically a table, and you can see it there. That table dominated the entire first half, and in the second half it split into 2 and dominated again from a different concept. But the idea was, what was an image that was so precisely, so absolutely of its time, but completely recognizable for all time? One huge table laden down for Christmas. And that is something that for 1,000, 2,000 years, but certainly for 1,000 years, has been that image of Christmas. You gather together for the feast. So one precise image, all the use of the fabrics, the homespun fabrics, the tonality of the colors, which were not bright but subdued, gave a sense of where what the play, where the play was set and how the play was set. And yet everything about it, unwrapping Christmas parcels, was not a thing that they probably would have done then, but it's something that we instantly recognize. So you're using images. This is, again, using imagery and minimalism in terms of scenic design to give the actor the support mechanism so that we could go out there and play these characters from the 1100s as if they were today, because we wanted you to recognize them today. And so we put the today language and the today delivery into the context of the 1100s purely by texture and certain visual images. That's, again, using theatre and using a minimalist approach to it to allow the audience to fill in the gaps. I want to go back to Willie Russell, who wrote Educating Rita, and this is just a very quick example of minimalism at its best. The first time we went into Union Project, the year that we were resident there, and we used what we call an alley stage. In other words, the stage ran down the middle and the audience was on both sides. Actors love this because they don't have to play to the audience have to come to them. But here is a perfect example of minimalism at its best. The play takes place in 2 halves. The first half, Shirley is at home in her kitchen, and it's a one-woman show. So every character that she is with is what she is describing. It is her job as an actor to create the other characters in your imagination. And the only thing she has to support her is the kitchen that she is in. Later on, in the second half of the play, she's gone on holiday to Greece. She's on an island. The other side of the, that's Karen Baum again, that behind her was the other sweeped wall at the end of what you saw in the first picture. So all we had was an image of a kitchen, the image of a beach, and nothing else. But those two images provided the audience with enough stimulus to understand where she was and what she was about. Everything else that happened, including a table in the middle, which was both kitchen table and beach table, everything else came from the actor who, as storyteller, was bringing you onto that set and into those locations and creating new ones in your imagination. But you were provided simply by just that very minimalist approach to scenic design, you were provided with the opportunity to join in, to become a participant. The actor, in a sense, I'm going to use the famous quote from Henry II, Henry V, the prologue at the beginning. When we talk of horses, think when we talk of horses that you see them, printing their proud hooves in the receiving earth. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishments of many years into an hourglass. Shakespeare is saying, please use your imagination. We'll give you enough information, you fill in the gaps. So it's not a new concept. In fact, if anything, it is the old concept that we are now quite willingly and thrillingly and delightedly embracing. We've got rid of what is unessential and deal on what is utterly essential to bring you a purity of theatre in which you can partake instead of observe. Shakespeare did it again, and we did it with our most recent production, which was Midsummer Night's Dream. Again, Shakespeare, he has three worlds in this play: the world of the court, the world of the working man, and the world of fairy. It is a world of the imagination. Everything about this play is about a dream. It is a dream. So each word needs a substance, and the substance of that world needs to be clearly defined, but it does not need to be real. Now, here you've seen a triple example. You saw the working men, you've seen the court, the lovers, and you see something of the world of fairy that we presented. We decided that we would, apart from the fact we would double up the cast so that the four lovers were also the four rude mechanicals. But we use white as a motif. A, because we were presenting Midsummer Night's Dream in midwinter. So if you're going to have a Midsummer Night's Dream, you might as well have a bit of frost around the place. But we use shades of white as a motif. Pure white for the virgin lovers. A tan white for the rude mechanicals, the workers, and a blue white for the creatures of the night, the world of fairy, and a pure white empty space on which to let the audience's imagination work. That fabric in the background could be trees, it could be it could be anything you want. It is what your imagination decides it to be. Actors could hide inside it or run around it or behind it, and the floor was a complete, flat, pure white. It was the ultimate empty canvas for your imagination to work on. Again, I come back to Peter Brook. Take an empty space and call it a bare stage. A man walks across this empty space while someone else is watching him, and that is all that is needed for an act of theatre to be engaged. And that is exactly the whole message. Midsummer Night's Dream, in fact, the way we staged it was, in a way, I suppose it was me saying, okay, you want to know what we do? That's what we do. That simply. One more I want to mention, and that was a play that we did a few years ago. I think it is the most perfect of modern Irish minimalist plays. Simply put, it is a play about the moment of dying, examined in 2 hours over 2 acts. Play is called Woman and Scarecrow by one of my very favorite writers, Marina Carr. In fact, we brought Marina over for this production. She came to see it and to do some talks while we were putting it on. It is a complex and yet remarkably simple play, because it is that moment when all memory is re-examined before the final extinction. You know, that notion of your whole life passes before you die. Well, that sort of concept was behind what is written. And when that happens, the question is put, who do we discuss that memory with, if not yourself? Or rather, that alter ego of us that stays with us, questioning us, the doubt in our minds that is always saying, is that really happened? And is there right up to the moment when you both cease to be? So those two characters, Woman and Scarecrow, who are in fact the same person, brilliantly played by Nikki Dukas as Woman and Karen Baum as Scarecrow. That's the moment of dying there. And in fact, I must say, Nikki Dukas, I've never seen anybody who looked like she had just died. It really was worrying to watch. But what we required was a space that was suggestive of a remembered reality. In other words, you could not do this, but I've seen this play. I saw it at the Royal Court in London, where they used a totally realistic set and it failed. I saw it done in Dublin where they used a totally surrealistic set and it failed. The whole point about this, and Gianni Downs, who designed this one, got it right, and Keith Trouts, who lit it. They got it right, and Marina felt they got it right as well, in that it was a remembered reality. It was those flashes, you know, like when you wake up and you know you dreamt something and you try to remember the dream and you remember certain images, but you can't make the connections between them. That is exactly how we designed that set. It was the floating isolation that the mind moves to as it starts to shut down. The bed, and then a blank floor, and then some floorboard and a chair on it, and then blank floor, and then some floorboard and this wardrobe, and another blank piece of floor and a table. But in between those little pieces of floorboard, there was nothing. You're demonstrating, you're giving enough for the actors to work on. Behind them, Johnny built and Keith lit a wall that was made of smoke. Don't ask how, it's very complex. Filled with light, so that the mood of the wall would change constantly with the mood of the actors. But all of that was doing was not giving you something to distract you or to draw your attention. It was simply providing the actor with a backdrop for the moments that they wished to create. Always the focus was on the actor. Always it was the actor who was drawing the pictures, telling the story. That's basically what it's about. Minimalism is about, and the reason that we do work, and to come back to my original point, the reason we work as a company with a group of actors who work regularly together, and that doesn't mean we don't bring in new, we bring in a lot of new people, but we do have this core, and a core attitude, an esprit de corps, if you like, of we want to be the best storytellers that we can, and we want to demonstrate classic text and classic themes with the greatest purity that we can achieve, the greatest simplicity that we can achieve, because we do not want you to sit back and look at it. We want you to lean forward and join in. We want it to be happening where the rose is red. And that's PICT. So, I've overrun my time as usual. Nice comments there, thank you. Okay, so I mentioned, I'm going to say a couple of quick things. We have a few treats coming up. The next 2 weeks, we are going to have what we're calling August in August. And for those of you who are PITTSBURGhers, you may know which August I'm referring to. And for those of you who are not, it is August Wilson, who is a classic playwright, or was a classic playwright by anybody's standard, son of Pittsburgh, and wrote some of the best of plays on being African American in America that anyone has or probably ever will write. And we have Wale Jamal, who is acted in all of his plays, is going to be doing a couple of weeks with us talking about the experience of working on the plays of August Wilson. Coming up, we're going to have, I'm not sure which weeks yet, but coming up in the nearly visible future, we're going to do 2 or possibly 3 programs deconstructing King Lear in a much more complex way than the way we deconstructed Macbeth. We're going to have Aoife Spillane-Hinks, who I mentioned earlier, directed Our Class and also directed Waiting for Godot and Sharon's Grave for us here in Pittsburgh. She's going to be joining me on a webinar. We're going to be talking about the plays, the Aran Island plays of John Millington Synge. And Matt Torney, who directed Sons of Ulster, Marching Towards the Somme, and directed also Crucifer of Blood. He's going to be joining us in a few weeks' time. He's just recently taken up a new artist directorship in Atlanta, Georgia. So we've got some very exciting things lined up over the next few weeks. We hope you continue to join us. I know all of you would much rather go off on summer vacations, but you can't because there's a pandemic. So you might as well be here on a Friday. We will always be here 2 o'clock on Friday. Thank you for joining us. And remember two other things. Tell your friends. The more we build the family, the happier we'll all be. And secondly, remember, whatever you can donate to us really matters. We can't earn money in the usual way at the moment. We can't sell tickets for shows. Please, please, please consider sending a donation. We're not asking for vast amounts. Any small donation will do. $10, $20, $2,500, anything that you can afford. Just push the button, push the donate button, send us some money. It means so much, and it does help to keep us all going because we've still got to pay some bills. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Friday.